Hey, I'm Stephanie with Brian LeFeve, optimization coach. And if you're wondering what the heck is that, I did the same thing. And I had to actually dive a little into some research and figure out what an optimization coach is. What do they do? What do they offer? How is that different from life coaching, from health coaching, from any kind of coaching? And once I learned what it actually is, I realized that every human being pretty much needs one. It fits in ideally, especially for the kind of work that I do. And when we're talking about breaking the mental health stigma, especially of today, because our minds are so wired for trouble and negativity. But the problem is that wiring is from when we were being chased by lions and tigers and bears, and we were running around with sticks and living in caves because we were doing those things for our survival, of which we don't do anymore. It's just not there. That has gone. We've evolved, but our brains haven't caught up to that because of the way society keeps us kind of under that fear pressure and in that constant state of survival. We're so in tune, unfortunately, to being under that stress. It used to serve its purpose, but it doesn't in today's emotional stressors, just not in the everyday lifestyle that we have. But we've developed these patterns. So, just an example is for somebody who is maybe starting their day on the shit side of things, with depression, in hand, or battling depression, or in a depressive state. You wake up late, you spill something rushing around, you're thinking, here we go, another crappy day. Then you get in your car, you're on your way to work, you get stuck in traffic, you're sharing road rage profanities, flipping the middle finger, cussing people out, fueling this downward spiral even more. And then you get to work and you're saying unnecessary comments to your coworkers, you're feeling slighted, you feel offended, you're snapping because you've got this negative mindset. It leads to arguments. That's your day. And then you head on home, you dive into whatever it is your escape might be, whether it's a numbing mechanism like alcohol or whatever you pick your poison, or binge watching TV, or just whatever it is that you're drowning your sorrows in and blaming your miseries on something or someone else, because that's what we do. We push those aside because F my life, right? That's where we get when we get to that point. It's a negative mind focused on negatives. And this is how depression takes over. There's always a reason that we allow that in there, whether we allow it or not, subconsciously or consciously, it happens. And then we feel like we get stuck in this mental unwellness, and it brings us to the point of claiming, and I hear this all the time, I am who I am. I can't change. This is who I am. This is what I believe. This is the life I was given. These are the cards I was dealt with. So if you are that person dealing with that mental unwellness, you absolutely have to initiate with this very first step that we're going to talk about. You have to counter your brain's biological tendency to focus on these negatives to overcome your adversity. And this is the way out of that tunnel vision. And quite frankly, we just can't do stuff like this on our own. We need help. Every professional athlete needs some kind of a coach to help them identify what they're doing, just an outside look in. Am I right?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what a great intro. And, a lot of the unnecessary suffering that we really come across is unfortunately because of how old our brain is. As you said earlier, it's slow to evolve. It's 1.7 million years old. And our brains only really, thing is to look at what is wrong and what we can run from, and how we can protect ourselves. So, nowadays it's not the saber-toothed tiger. It's going to be our coworkers. It's going to be, our family members. It's, our kids that constantly stress us out. So what happens is that now we're in this constant, sympathetic nervous system. So this is part of the nervous system that is our fight, flight, or freeze, and it is designed to basically take all of our blood and all of our energy to our extremities to run or to fight. And the saddest part is that we are constantly in a state of sympathetic nervous system, this stress response, these stress hormones that are produced. And just because of the fact that we're always looking at the negatives, we're always kind of inundated with so many things that really stress us out, and we haven't learned to detach from that. And we'll go into that. But when we're constantly in a sympathetic nervous system, this is the fight or flight, we're producing stress hormones like norepinephrine and cortisol, and these are stress hormones that are great temporarily enough to get us to run. But when they're actually produced in our bodies constantly because of our stress, that's causing actual disease in our body, disease in our body. So the disease in our minds cause disease in our body, and then we're basically out of what we call homeostasis, which is balance in our body, and we're so out of that. So there's the important thing to remember is that there's 3 types of stress. We have physical stress, so just by getting hurt, impact. There's environmental stress that we're inundated with all the time. So like these are the products like women are putting on, cosmetics, things like that. This is GMOs, this is the pesticides. This is sadly, they just tested in the air. We're actually breathing in small traces of glyphosate, which is Roundup. And now this is weed killer. So now there's so many environmental toxins on top of stress toxins, and then of course now we have our stress hormones on top of that. So we're stacking all these stressors into our body, which is really causing us to be out of balance and out of homeostasis. And what happens is that we can't concentrate. It disrupts our gut health. It creates brain fog. Gives us a lack of concentration. And when it's disrupting our gut health, this is the most important thing to remember. 70% of our immune system is in our gut. Because of COVID, and why so many people died is because their gut was compromised. And that's from the foods that we're eating, the standard American diet. I'm sorry, it's the SAD diet. This is the stressors in our lives. This is environmental stressors. So we're depleting our immune system. On top of that, serotonin, which is it's a feel-good mood stabilizer, makes us happy. That comes from our gut as well. So they're realizing this more and more. Like the gut brain barrier has really been shown over the last 15-20 years, and this is all new science that's coming out. But it's fascinating. And the sad part is that we have a hard time getting rid of these toxins in our body, So, we're talking about all these stress hormones that we have. And then on top of that, Stephanie, then we're trapping these emotions into us. So we don't let things go. And that is a big problem. Again, what people have to remember is we're able to turn on and off these stress hormones. We're able to downregulate our nervous system. We're able to change that, but we have to have it. It comes from our mind first. It comes from our thoughts first. That's the most important thing to remember. So a lot of that is basically our beliefs. It comes down to our beliefs. So something to remember is that our beliefs are what drive our behaviors in life, and then our behaviors drive the results that we get. So, everyone is where they are right now in life because of their thoughts, because of their beliefs. And you have to understand, most of those are limited beliefs. Most of those are negative beliefs. And these are beliefs that we've had growing up. Not all of us had the best caregivers. And the things that were said to us from 0 to 7 is when we instill all these habits into us. And unfortunately, not all of us had the best caregivers. So, we learn these behaviors, unfortunately, from our caregivers, and we carry those with us until there's a point in our lives where we need to make a change. Okay. And that's
So,
really,
not to cut you off, but
no,
a lot of those are pre-programmed beliefs too. They're not even ours. And
no, isn't that crazy? Yeah. I mean, we're being primed all the time if you think about it. If you know what
yeah.
priming is. Yeah. I mean, we're being primed all the time. You know, this is through algorithms, this is through, you know, commercials and everything else. And you know, and you got to understand, a lot of our thoughts, you're exactly right, are not ours. They're really not
So
ours.
for somebody who doesn't know what being primed means, what is that?
So priming is basically when an outside source is kind of directing us towards something. These could be TV commercials. These could be, well, I'll give you a really good example. This is fascinating. Yale did a study years ago, and this is a priming study, and this blew my mind. And they've done it over and over again. They've done different studies, but this one was, they would have two actors with coffee go into a mall. And what they would do is they would stop somebody in the mall and they would say, hey, you know, could you hold my coffee? I got to grab my phone out of my pocket. So they would grab the coffee, they'd grab their phone out of their pocket and they'd return it back, and then that person would leave. What they did, Stephanie, is they took another actor, and the two actors with coffee, they did this to about 15 to 20 different people, okay? What they did is after they gave them the coffee, they'd have another actor follow that person and say, hey, listen, I'll give you $20 if you read this short description and tell me about the character. That was it. And most of them said, yeah, I'll do it for $20. This is going to take a minute. So this is the interesting part. The original two actors had coffee. One was cold coffee, one was hot coffee. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And when the person described the character in this paragraph, the ones that had cold coffee said the character was cold and unloving. The person that had the hot coffee said the character was warm and loving. It's insane. And that's just from coffee in a difference in heat. Okay. So we are literally being primed all the time. And if we don't choose our own thoughts, they will be chosen for us. And that's something that people have to understand. So, you know, again, so that is what priming is. And study, they've done this study over and over, and it's like 89% is accurate when it comes to that. Isn't that insane?
And that's just a physical temperature. So think about the
Physical.
temperature of the topic of the emotion. Like if somebody's angry and charged with this discontent energy,
Mm-hmm.
it feeds you. It feeds a child, and that's how they grow up.
It does, and we're being inundated with this all the time. You know, I mean, I'm going to be honest. The news is a great example, Stephanie. I mean, I tell people, listen, pick and choose your news. Don't watch the news on TV. You got to understand. I mean, you know, they're only showing the worst of the worst, and that's their job. Okay, so you can't blame them. You got to understand.
Yeah.
The media industry, the news is basically an industry that has shareholders, right? So they're a corporation, and the shareholders have to make money. How do you make money? Well, you shocking news. Shock news sells, right? So so now imagine watching CNN like 12 hours a day, which some people do. You know, during COVID, people were watching CNN are like, oh, they're seeing the worst. They're seeing the worst. Now, how is that priming our brain?
It is. It's a constant priming, and it's done under fear. Anytime you make a decision under fear, it's the wrong thing. People ask me all the time, I don't know what's right, I don't know what's wrong. I've got myself in that position. I don't know what the right thing to do is. But as soon as you start looking for an external factor to make that decision for you or to base your decision on, if it's in fear, you're screwed.
100%. And have you ever heard the acronym for fear? False emotions appearing real. Yeah. So, and that's all it is, you know. I mean, honestly, if you think about this, what's the difference between fear and faith? They're just something that you know what I'm saying? If you think about it, faith is just something that you don't know, that you have faith that you believe in something, and fear is kind of that same thing. They're kind of run hand in hand if you really think about it. So
they do, yeah. So to be able to counter that, you have to be able to get to a place to counter your brain's biological tendencies, because we're just wired to focus on the negative. It's coming at us from every direction, not only because what, almost 2 million years. That's the way, that's the way we were, our
Yeah.
basic instinct was downloaded into the brain. But we don't live like that anymore. Now it's relationships, like you said, kids and coworkers and the news, what the latest and greatest is happening out in the world. And it's, for the most part, it's crappy. We don't focus on the good stuff. We don't hear the good news. We hear all of the devastating things. That's what they focus on. That's what they feed us. So the way we get, no wonder we have so much mental illness, right? No wonder we are set up, a set up society to be mentally unwell. We don't teach kids how to deal with tragedy or adversity or
Sadly.
grief or anger or discontent. We don't teach them anything like that. And we also don't teach people that stress leads to dis-ease. Something that just kills me when somebody says, oh, I can handle it. I don't have stress in my life. That's not going to get me. Stress is literally the foundation to any illness or any disease. All of it. It's all based on stress. So it's how you are able to consciously get your way out of that tunnel vision to create these neural pathways at any given moment. But it has to be with that conscious effort. And it has to be with somebody who can guide you, because if left to your own reserves, we're in big trouble. We're just in big trouble. And escaping depression is going to be really super hard. So the first thing you have to do is you either have to realize or decide, or have just gotten to that place where you reach out your hand and you've decided that enough is enough and you want the suffering to end. And to make any kind of change in your life, you have to mentally prepare. Diving into a new nutrition plan or doing all the therapies or doing all the things isn't going to work ever, never, ever, if you haven't mentally got yourself in that right place, in that starting place. That first step is never going to be a full step if you don't mentally put yourself there.
That's so true. And everything starts with that. Everything starts in the brain. And there's a great quote by Einstein. It's let me think about it for 1 second. It's we can't fix a problem with the same mind that created it. So it's really changing that mindset, and it starts with what we focus on, because a lot of us focus on the worst of the worst. So and I'm gonna do mention something. I have a course out, but I have a free course on morning rituals. You started in the morning. You said that like how we start our morning really predicts the day. It really does. So if we're waking up stressed and thinking about all the things that we have to do, or we go on our phone and we look at everything on the phone itself, and that stresses us out. But really, the morning is really how we start the day. But I'll get into like what most people focus on, because you'll get this, and because what we focus on really expands. So most of the time people are either focusing on the past or the future, and in the past they're going back to a stressful event in their lives, and this is the sad part, Stephanie, is a lot of people don't understand this, is that those stress hormones do become addictive. Okay, so just like any drug, we can get very addicted to these stress hormones, and when we're so addicted to them, we have to go back to that past to think about that negative thing that happened to us, that tragic event, that traumatic event that happened to us, because it brings back those neurochemicals, the cortisol and norepinephrine, that actually kind of makes us feel normal. And that's very sad, because so many people are used to that. But the biggest thing we have to remember is that, if we can't focus on the past, because we can't change the past. So many people try to change something they can't. So only to look back at the past is only learn from the past. That's the biggest thing. So learning from something that you did wrong, that's the only reason you should be in the past. The future, that's another thing that stresses us out, because we're predicting and we're making a story. We are the greatest storytellers in the world, Stephanie. We write novels and short stories and books and all kinds of things in our heads that as well as I do typically don't come true.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're have this scenario in our head of something in the future, and then when it doesn't happen, we get stressed out about it, and we get depressed, and we get sad. In the future, you should only be looking at the future if it's something of a business or something that you're trying to, a goal to accomplish or anything like that. But that's the saddest part. The present is the now. This is where we're the happiest, when we're, so, and I'll get into it in a second, but we're never present because we're lost in thought all of the time. Okay. So to be present is to be conscious, aware of your thoughts, and be in the now. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very difficult for people to do. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you probably talk to somebody that they're not listening, like those people, like you're talking to them and they're off in la la land. And
Mm-hmm.
my mom can be like that sometimes, and it's funny. I think it was like a month ago, for the hell of it, I knew she wasn't listening. I'm talking, and I said, well, Mom, I'm going to become a Tibetan monk, and I'm leaving next week. And she's like, oh, okay, yeah. And she just wasn't listening. It was just funny, man. So but that's very common, is that we're not in the now. We're not consciously aware, and that's one of the biggest things. And so what are the other things that we have that we're not very conscious of either? So it's what we focus on, or a lot of people focus on what they don't have compared to what they have. So if you ask somebody just out of the blue, hey, what do you focus on more, what you don't have or what you have? The majority of people say what they don't have.
Mm-hmm.
And we are the richest country in the world. We have so much. I mean, just to have a roof over our head, clothes on our back, food in the fridge, we have more than anything else. But now we're looking at what we don't have, and we suffer because of that. A lot of it is, on social media too. And I hate to say it, but we're constantly comparing ourselves. We're sitting in winter Michigan, and then we see a friend that's in the tropics somewhere. We're like, oh man, dude, like he's got it lucky, and blah blah blah. And we suffer because of that. It was Eleanor Roosevelt that said, comparison is the thief of joy. And I've always loved that quote, and it really is, because we're constantly comparing ourselves to people. So, listen, we really can't, control, what we don't have. We can only control what we have and be thankful for what we have. And the Stoic philosophy, they talk about, the biggest asset that we can have. Well, I should say this. Another thing that we focus on is what, we can't control over what we can control. Okay. And that's another thing that stresses people out. They're trying to figure out what the things that they can't control and how they can control those things. And, this is really going to drive us crazy, because the reality is that, we can't control outside events, but we can only choose how we respond to those events. And it's a very high Stoic philosophy. And according to the Stoics, the biggest thing they said is, your mind is the asset that must be worked on the most and understood the best. So we can start being conscious of our thoughts, and conscious of our minds, and conscious of the negative connotations and negative thoughts that are constantly coming into our head. We're able to stop those. And this is called pattern interruption. And I'll get into that as well. But I just wanted to say, those are the three things that you have to be very conscious of. Like, what we focus on, like, the past, present, or the future. What we focus on is what we have or what we don't have, or what we can control over what we can't control. And that is one of the biggest things, that to be able to be conscious of the controlling part. So so
that's the difference between responding and reacting too.
It is. And that's a huge thing too. And when you're very conscious of your thoughts, you have less of a tendency to react, Stephanie. And this is, a lot of this is Buddhist philosophy of non-reaction, non-judgment, and non-attachment. And and that's what gets us in trouble, is the reaction part. And when we can slow down and focus more on being very conscious, then we're less likely to say the stupid things that we say, right? So when we get angry, what happens, right? So we get angry, and usually when we get angry, you got to understand what happens. Physiology, in our physiology is that we basically stop breathing, and we don't breathe normally. And then we're creating less oxygen to our brain, which of course now we're saying, things that we regret. And that's what's so important of being the conscious aware of your mind, because, you know, our thoughts create our reality. They really do. So we have to be very conscious of our thoughts. You know, there in the Tao Te Ching, which is Taoism, one of the most beautiful quotes I love, and this is so true, and you'll understand this, is that, you know, watch your thoughts because they become your words. Because think about that. So, like, you know, we're always thinking something, and let's say we're thinking something about a friend or something, and we're like, oh man, that friend does this and this, and then all of a sudden it slips out one day. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
We have to be very conscious of our thoughts. So they say be conscious of your thoughts because they become your words. Watch your words because they become your actions. Watch your actions because they become your habits, and watch your
Mm-hmm.
habits because they become your character. Watch your character because that becomes your destiny. And it's very important to remember that. And these habits are what gets instilled that we have to disengage from and rewire from as well. You talked about it earlier, about rewiring our brain. So you know, again, Stephanie, stress causes so much unnecessary suffering, and I know this is a big part of this, but you know, if you think about it, how many people do you know that are on antidepressants that aren't necessarily, you know, they're still depressed, and it's very sad, and you see that all the time. And there's this, and there's a big, we do need to have antidepressants in our society. A lot of people need them. The fact that they're on it so long term, and they only rely on that, and they don't rely on changing their thoughts and changing their mindset and changing their behaviors. That's the biggest thing. So they're just relying on that just because, okay, they're not taking any other, you know, avenues to reduce that stress.
And that's what keeps us pinned under the mental illness stigma. We're not changing anything. We're medicating it. We're band-aiding it. We're not giving opportunity to change it. So we keep people stuck in this. I am who I am. I take my medication. I do the best that I can. But there's other things. You take the medication to stabilize you while you make those changes. Something my counselor said to me probably a month or so ago was, when you're angry, because I'm an advocate, I stand up for people, I will do anything to make change or to help somebody that I see suffering and bring them to a place that's more safe or stable. But that has sometimes gotten me in trouble because I just fly off at the mouth. And then when I think about it later, I could have said the things different, or I could have used different words. So what she said to me was to break that loop. When you are, say, for instance, about to fire off a text at somebody, if you're in that angry state, consciously pull yourself out, go into notes instead of the text message app, and type it out. Sit on it for 24 hours, don't respond, and then look at it in 24 hours. Read the message or take into consideration what just happened, reread your response and decide, am I ready to send this off? And I tell you, 9 times out of 10,
you don't.
oh, no, it was a big, but that keeps us in. So you mentioned the way you feel, even if it's crappy, even if the situations you keep finding yourself in are ruining your life, your body gets addicted to those feelings of ruin, even though they are absolutely destroying your relationship, your marriage, your work ties, whatever it is, your health. Whatever it is, you keep creating these situations, or you're picking arguments or saying things that you shouldn't be saying. And your body is just so comfortable in feeling discomfort and shame and guilt. And that's terrible. But we've okayed that. We're not making it better. We have to learn to be able to do things, to take that step and change the way we think, because you go to the doctor, they're not going to give you that. It's not going to happen.
No.
You might need that medication. You might need the antidepressant, the anti-anxiety to help you, as a tool to help you make those changes, but temporarily. That stuff's dangerous in the long term.
It is. And you have to understand, you know, the pharmaceutical company is a $1 trillion industry, $1 trillion. it's more than U.S. government spends on our defense. I mean, think about that. It's just crazy to think about. And, that we're the richest country in the world, yet we're the sickest country in the world as well,
Yeah.
and there's something to be said about that. I want to go back to what you said earlier, though. I thought that was fascinating because I just read this recently about, and that's so true. If you're upset, being able to, if you're writing an email, wait a day or wait a couple hours or wait the next day. And I'll tell you something, some breath work that'll help down regulate your nervous system to get you back into, homeostasis. But I just read it recently that Lincoln during the Civil War was so upset about his generals, he'd write them letters, but would never mail them just to get it out. And they found the letters like years later, like, wow, look at all these letters that he never sent to these generals. And he was pissed off in these letters, like, you should have done this, you should have done this, you should have done this. But he didn't send them. But he got it out. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
I love that. I thought that was so cool because there's things that we want to say to somebody, but we're never going to say, if we're angry, we're not going to say it in the right way. We're not going to say it in, in a loving manner. I mean, Dr. Wayne Dyer once said, do you want to be right or do you want to be from love? You know what I'm saying? So because our ego wants to be right all the time, right? So the fact of the matter is like, okay, being right isn't always the best thing. When you come from love, it's going to come from a way different angle, So, so I think that was fascinating. And, this is something that I think is pretty big that we have to understand as well. Is that, and I just read this quote the other day, is from the Dalai Lama, and only the development of compassion and understanding for others can bring us tranquility and happiness that we all seek. Okay. So I think if you think about it, Stephanie, a lot of the biggest stressors that we come into play is from a misinterpretation of something. Okay. So meaning let's think of that bad driver in the car you kind of talked about earlier, right? So, this is very common. Somebody cuts us off or somebody's driving really slow or whatever it is. And we're making up a story about that person. Okay. So give you an example. I mean, you see the old lady driving in the car, right? Driving 30 miles under the speed limit.
Mm-hmm.
Her front seat is probably taken off because she can barely see over the steering wheel. Just kind of looking over the steering wheel. I think God is actually driving her car for her. But we make up this story like, oh, she shouldn't be driving, blah, blah, blah. And we become stressed about it. Now let's shift our perception of that. What if that old woman hasn't eaten in days, has no family, and is just trying to get to the store to buy some food, right? We have to start looking at things from a different angle. We only focus on things from our angle, on what we think that, or what we interpret that person to be. And we're telling stories again. So or the driver that cuts us off, that's speeding, that's going through, we're like, that guy's an asshole, he's driving like a maniac. Well, he could be driving and go pick up his daughter's in the hospital, or his wife's in the hospital, or, we don't know what's going on with that situation, but we make up these stories ourselves. So we suffer, needlessly, because we're making up stories that aren't even true. So I try to tell people to shift their perception of things. So that old lady that's driving just may understand, she could just be hungry. She has no family. The only way she can get to the grocery store is to drive. And she's probably not the best driver because she's so old. Or the person that's driving like a maniac that, their daughter could be in the hospital, or they eat really bad Mexican food and they got to go to the bathroom. Who knows? We don't know. Right. So we have to kind of really shift those stories because, when we start looking at things from a different lens, the things we look at change. And that's a Dr. Wayne Dyer quote. When look at, when you look at things differently, the things you look at change, right? So, and that's very huge because that's a big portion of our suffering, Stephanie, is the fact that we're making up stories that typically aren't even true. I mean,
So dangerous. It is.
It is. It's dangerous, isn't it?
But we fill in the blanks because if we don't have all of the details, and I'm guilty of this, when you don't have all the details, you want the whole story. You want to take the next step. You want to make a decision. You want to know what to say. But if you don't have all of that information, we're not necessarily coming from a place of love anymore. We're coming from a place of, well, I need to figure out what this is and I'm going to be right about it. And that's the end of it, because we're storytellers. Our life is this unfolding story that we're creating. So as we create it, we tend to create other people's stories as well, just like the little old lady. You don't know what her situation is. You don't know if maybe she's in the midst of a heart attack. We don't know. You just don't know. Or, you know, somebody having an outburst in the store. You don't know what they're going through.
No.
And it creates unnecessary suffering. It can destroy relationships. But we have to be able to take a step back. And if that's not your place of business, maybe it's not your business to find out what that little old woman's going through. Bless and release it. If it is something in your personal life, take a step back, step into that conscious frame of mind and gather those details you need. Don't just put them in. And like I said, I'm guilty. It's something that I have always done. I'm an information gatherer. I'm a researcher by nature. I'm a seeker because I want to be a doer. So I'm looking for those pieces of information, whether they fit or not.
Yeah. Well, but we're able to change the narrative. So instead of the negative narrative, think of a positive narrative. The biggest thing to understand is that, you know, well, it was Albert Einstein. He says the most important decision we can make in our lives is whether we want to live in a hostile or friendly environment. That's a choice. Everything is a choice. Choice whether to be upset about something, choice whether to let something go, the choice whether to come from love, whether to come from what's inside us. Because typically, you got to understand, when we get squeezed, whatever comes out is what's inside of us. I mean, if you squeeze an orange, only orange juice is going to come out. If an angry person, you know, is if somebody has anger in them, and whatever and they get upset, whatever comes out is basically what's in them. So we have that ability to shift that. And if most people had more compassion and understanding for people, we wouldn't live in a world that we live in today. Because now we're not making up that story. Now we're switching the view. So instead of that old lady just shouldn't be driving because she's old, or that person shouldn't be driving like a maniac, we shift it and say, you know what? I'm going to come from compassion and love. There's probably something up with that situation. That old lady probably needs food or whatever. I'll make up a positive, you know, connotation in my head over a negative every time. But this is practice, Stephanie. This is something we have to constantly practice. If we're not practicing this, then basically we're just going to go back to our old patterns, you know. And this is rewiring our brain. This is rewiring, you know, hard-driven, you know, things that have been put in our brain that we only look at the negatives. So once we start focusing on the positives, once you start shifting our perception of things really start to change and open up. This takes constant work, though. It really does. And that's important to remember. And that's why it's so important to know the mind. It was Epictetus, is a Stoic philosopher, that says no man is free unless he's mastered himself. And mastering himself is mastering the mind. Okay. That's the biggest thing. And that's where, you know, being a meditator myself, that was one of the biggest shifts for me, was being more consciously aware. So when you start meditating, you start focusing on, you know, you're the conscious observer of your thoughts. So you're focusing on the thoughts. So, you know, in meditation, people think when you meditate, you're just letting, you know, you have no thoughts, and that's impossible. Thoughts are involuntary. It's like a heartbeat. You can't tell your heartbeat to stop breathing, stop beating. Same with thoughts. They're going to keep coming in. What happens, though, is you learn to not be carried away with thought. As I said earlier, we're constantly carried away in thought, so we're never present, right? If we're more conscious and we can go back to being in the now, then we're more conscious aware, and we can start working on those pattern interruptions. So meaning when a negative thought comes in, so let's say I'm driving and somebody cuts me off, typically I'd be like, that guy's an asshole, but now I'm like, wait a minute, no, that's a habit that I've had. I'm going to pattern interrupt that and say, okay, that person has to go to the hospital, or his wife's in the hospital, or whatever it could be, and think of something in a loving manner over the negative manner, if that makes sense.
That's the difference between reacting and responding. That's the difference between fueling that loop of that rush of those neurochemicals that even though they make us crappy, they're so comfortable. You have to be able to break out of that.
I know it is. And you have to understand, it was a George Bernard Shaw quote that really changed things for me about 10 years ago, is we don't find ourselves, we create ourselves.
Yeah.
We create the identity we want to be. When we're making a change in our lives, like I went through a pretty bad disruptive part of my life about 9 years ago, and it was called post-traumatic growth, if you've ever heard of it. We often, so it's interesting that something so, traumatic can actually turn your life around. So when I learned that quote, I learned that we can create an identity for ourselves, and our strongest fuel is to be congruent with our identity. So if we tell ourselves I'm an angry person, or I'm like this because of that, our mind is always going to be like, yes, that's the case. We're going to be congruent with your identity every time. But we're able to change our identity. We're able to shift that. And a lot of that is just is doing the work. And that's one of the hardest things. Like, Stephanie, most people really have a hard time changing. Change is very difficult. It really is. We become in these patterns and these loops that we're just comfortable on. But sometimes it takes something very traumatic for somebody to want to make a big shift in their lives.
Well, and one of the stigmas still on mental illness is that you just don't want it, or you're lazy, or you're irresponsible. And that's not always the case.
No.
It's hard. Change is hard. You become addicted.
It is.
You don't have to be addicted to drugs or alcohol. You could be an addict of those chemicals in your system. And those traumatic events is when I see people. 99% of the time, in my profession as a practitioner, people have come to me over the last 13 years because of something absolutely devastating in their life. My life has been changed because of absolutely devastating traumatic events. And I have always found a way to grow through them. You cannot go around it. You can't go under it.
No.
You can't get yourself excused from it. You have a choice, though. You can either grow through what you're going through, or you can muddle through and then just drag yourself through the mud for the rest of your life. And it's never been an option for me, but I also don't suffer chronic mental illness. Periods or bouts of depression, we're human. Everybody does. We've got a broad spectrum of emotions. And if you don't experience it, you're going to get sick. If you try to suppress the depression, it will become dis-ease at some point. Like you said, whatever you squeeze, when you squeeze, whatever's in there is going to come out. You have to be able to deal with that. And when stuck in mental illness, you're not. You're tucking it in, you're suppressing these emotions, and they're bubbling and boiling and creating this issue. And you're making up stories that are not true. And you're creating illness and physical diseases and symptoms, and then you start to have gut issues, and now you're constipated, and now you've got diarrhea, and now you have chronic headaches, and now you have insomnia, and all of these things happen because of that emotional trigger. 100% of the time when you're diagnosed with any kind of disease, whether it be cancer, heart disease, even diabetes, major depressive disorder, 100% of the time, there's an emotional correlate. And this has been studied in Germany. There was a radiologist who worked in an oncology clinic who noticed in CT scans this concentric ring of fluid buildup on brain scans.
Yeah.
So he asked permission, hey, do you mind if I study these just to see? We're working in oncology. Everybody's got a cancer diagnosis. I find it very odd that they all have this fluid buildup. So Dr. Hamer discovered that according to the part of the brain that had this fluid buildup was the exact organ or tissue that had the development of cancer in it.
Wow.
The emotional trigger or trauma was the link to the cancer. When you are able to fully dissolve that, holistic healing, mind, body, spirit, soul, energy, all of that, you cannot just go after the physical. You cannot just go after the mental. You have to go after the whole person. So once they discovered that, their way of treating patients changed. It was day and night. And it's that conscious effort, though, to be able to step out of there. So the I am who I am is a false narrative that we tell ourselves. And if you stay there, you're going to be stuck, you're going to be sick, you're going to feel like crap. And you have to be able to reach out to take that step, whether you've been diagnosed with some kind of mental illness or not. I mean, that the truth is, you want change, but you don't know how, you don't know what to do, you don't know where to go. So you keep to yourself and you're going to keep yourself stuck. So we have to find ways to optimize our ability to turn these things around. Rolling through life with I am who I am is dangerous and dark, and it will absolutely destroy your life.
So true. And you're so right, is that we suppress so many, emotions, and we don't let them go, and those cause blockages in us. And I like to look at blockages like, if you look at a river and then you put rocks in that stream, in that river, and then the water is disruptive, it's going over, it's flowing over. And that's kind of a correlation of us as well, is that we have all these blockages and it's hard to move forward because we can't release them. And if you look at somebody that's really self-aware and self-acknowledged, or gotten to a point of more self-actualization, they understand that they have to release the anger right away. So everybody will get angry, but it's the difference is how long we hold on to that, right? Like, we can hold on to it for 5 minutes, a day, a month, a year, years and years and years on end, that we can't release that, or let go. The faster we can let go of these things, we have to feel into it first. That's important. So anything that has upset me, and I've learned this over the years, I'll feel into it, but I'll let it go, and I'll truly let it go. And by letting it go, you're not adding on to more of the blockages in your body, because that's the stuff that holds us back. And then what we tell ourselves as well, I mean, just like you said, I'm like this because of this, well, you can change that narrative and say, okay, that made me strong, so I'm going to make this new path and change my path, to look at the positive, to look at the, instead of the negatives, to feel into my emotions and to let these things go before I hold on to them and keep going. It becomes a mood, it becomes a habit, if you think about it, all these blockages. So the faster we're able to release, and again, this comes to be more self-aware. Meditation helps quite a bit with this. Being in tune with yourself, again, self-awareness is key, because now we're able to be conscious of it and say, you know what, this doesn't serve me. This thought doesn't serve me. And that's how we rewire our brain. Like, we're hardwired for these things that have happened all of our lives. So that's how we respond to them. And the only way to rewire our brain is to be self-aware and self-actualized, and be able to be the observer of our thoughts, Stephanie. So when those thoughts do come in, we're going to be saying, you know what, that thought does not serve me. I've done this with two things. It took me years to do, but I did it with two major things in my life where I was very conscious of it. And then I do it, it's called a pattern interruption. So when that thought comes in, what I use, everybody can use a different mantra, a different saying, but I use that's not me. And when I say that, and I kept saying that thought lessened and lessened and lessened, and now it rarely comes up. You know what I'm saying? And those are negative thoughts that we have. So we're able to rewire that, but it does take time, and it does take being more conscious. But again, as I talked about, most people are not present because they're lost in thought all the time. You can't enjoy, like, some people can't enjoy sitting by the ocean because, and say they're sitting by the ocean, oh, this is beautiful, and then the wind comes up or sand goes in their face. They're like, oh, the ocean sucks. You know what I'm saying? So they're getting kind of freaked out about these things, but it's hard for them to be conscious because they're thinking about so many other things, and they can't enjoy the present moment of what we have in front of us. And there's so much beauty in the world that we really kind of get so distracted of being in our minds too much that we lose track, and we don't see the beauty around us anymore, and that's really very unfortunate, because most people aren't happy because they're not conscious in the now. They're always somewhere else. They're always focused on something else, as we talked about earlier, the past or what they don't have, or what that person has, So
And
that's
letting go is hard.
letting go
That's
is very difficult, but it's like, okay, so think about anything we do is practice, right? So like, if you're somebody that works out, well, you have to constantly work out. You can't just go one time and get muscles, right? This is a constant thing. Any sports athlete, anybody learning a musical instrument, whatever it is, you have to keep at it to get better at it. So we usually start something, Stephanie, and again, this is where habits become into place. But we usually start something. We start it for like a week, and we're talking, you think of, New Year's Eve, right? We have these resolutions. I'm going to go to the gym. So how many people get gym memberships? The gyms love New Year's Eve, man. They're like, yeah, they're racking it in. And they, what is the rate of people that end up stopping the gym after 3 weeks to a month is 80%. So, we have to be constant and diligent, but it's how much do we want that? How bad do we want that? If we're more conscious aware and we're more, understanding and compassionate, okay, think about how the world would be if one person becomes more consciously aware, more compassionate, understanding, the next person, the next person, the next person, and how we respond to, like I had somebody that I cut him off and I felt horrible, and they were bitching and yelling, and I kept saying, listen, man, I am so sorry. I really apologize. It's hard for them to respond when somebody's actually admitting it, right? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So again, that's a big portion of what it takes, but it does take a lot of things. I mean, the nutrients we're putting in our body causes stress as well,
Yeah.
or the bad foods that we're putting in our body. If we're not getting the right nutrients, if we're not exercising and having an outlet, that's another thing. I have these pillars that I always look at, and the first thing, we have to really focus on is our mindset. That is the biggest thing. Everything starts in the mind. Any change that we want to have starts in the mind. And then again, eating the right food, exercising, at least getting outside, going for a walk. It doesn't have to be in a gym. People think exercise. I went on a walk this morning. That's like, that for me is like, it's meditative. It's relaxing. I'm out in nature and I'm getting fresh air. This is things that people, kind of, we get into this habit, Stephanie, of sitting on a couch and watching Netflix, and you know what I'm saying, and so that's a big portion of it. Again, a lot of it too is just having connection, having human connection. A lot of what happened during COVID and the lack of connection caused so much depression. I mean, we know this, and the sad part is that people can be depressed and feel alone in a family environment, even.
Yeah.
Which is really crazy, So
And that goes to the letting go thing, because if you have been wronged at some point in your life, or if you're living with that person that wronged you, or if for some reason you are no longer with that person that wronged you, just because you have gone on to Tuesday and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday and then every day thereafter doesn't mean that you've let it go. And letting it go is not to be confused with condoning or okaying trauma or something really crappy that a wrongdoing that somebody has done to you. It's the process of processing.
Yeah.
So letting go can be just the word letting go. You want me to let go of what that person did to me? That's hard. That's a hard thing to accept, but processing it can be a different just looking at it from a different perspective, coming at it with love, but you have to make that conscious effort to do so. You have to take these different steps. You have to learn that the place that you're coming from is a totally different place than what you have been programmed or habitually brought yourself to do. Old ways of being, how does it go? If you want to change, you have to change. I think it's just that simple.
Yeah.
But it's that hard. The simplest things are just because it's simple doesn't make it easy.
Well, I can tell you one thing that set me free. One of the biggest things that allowed me to move forward when I let go of is forgiving, and forgiving two people in my life.
The F word.
The F word is really tough. And let me tell you, think about carrying like 1,000-pound weight throughout your life of something that you never let go. And then all of a sudden, you honestly, truly in your heart, let it go. And when that weight comes off, the freedom is unreal. It's like no other. And when
And
I
you had
was,
to do that twice.
I had to do it twice, but you got to understand this, and this is important to remember, because I thought I forgave, these two people in my life. But if you truly forgave the person, when you see them again, those thoughts and feelings won't come up. So when those thoughts and feelings came up, I didn't truly forgive that person. It took me a bit, but once I did and I could see that person, I was just full of love. Now, it doesn't let go of what that person did to you, and you'll never forget that, and that's fine. But those negative emotions aren't coming up to where it's causing you stress and duress. And then again, it's like that 1,000-pound backpack that you just let go, and you're like, holy shit. Because I got to tell you, it was transformational for me to let that go, because I carried it for so long. And again, we get sucked into those habits, right? Or those the neurochemicals, we get addicted to them, because when I thought of them, I got that rush. I was like, oh man, I got that rush again, and this is horrible. And you got to understand, those are choices. We have
Yeah.
a choice, we have a choice not to think of that. We have a choice to let that go. But that was the biggest transformation in my life, was actually letting go and forgiving those people, and actually telling them I forgave them as well, because that
Ah,
released a lot from them. It's important. You can't just let go. You have to tell them. Again, it doesn't change the fact of what they did or make it, any better, but it just allows you to say, you know what, I truly forgive you. And that helped them. And one was my father. He was very abusive. So like, he was in tears and he was so thankful, even though it didn't change anything of what he did, but it allowed some of that to let go in him. You know what I'm saying? And we have a much better relationship now because of that, because I've always held that tension with me. Anytime I saw him, and I just wasn't comfortable, and then all of a sudden, when I started making a big shift in my life and wanting to transform my life, I knew that was one of the biggest things I needed to do, Stephanie, because we hold on to that too much. So we're carrying around this bag of weight with us. And when we're able to let go, I tell you what, you feel free, and you feel, and that's where you start feeling more love in your life, and more compassion and more understanding for people. But forgiveness was one of the biggest things for me. It really was.
and you had the privilege, though, of your dad being here physically, so you could say that to him. Not everybody has that, especially if it's, if you're somebody who's in your 60s or 70s and you just got a cancer diagnosis and you had very abusive parents. A lot of this is childhood trauma. A lot of this stems from childhood.
It is.
So we don't always have that privilege or opportunity to go back to our parents and say that, if they're, if they've passed, or if it's just such an abusive relationship that it's unsafe. So there are different ways. Writing the letter that doesn't get sent, it's still the release. It's still letting it go. Recording it in the audio part of your phone or an audio recorder, so that you verbally release that. No, it still goes out there. The energy still gets released and accepted to some degree, but forgiveness is for us.
It
When
is.
somebody does you wrong, you will never have peace or calm or ease
Yeah.
if you're always bubbling up. If you think of that person and you bubble, if you had a very bad breakup or a divorce or whatever it is, and you see them or think of them, or just start to reflect on a memory, and if it starts to bubble up, you have not forgiven, you have not released, because you haven't processed it. And you have to forgive them and yourself. You have to also forgive yourself for being in their presence, for being involved in that. And that's hard.
It is hard, but think about how much, and how much like bitterness and anger and resentment we have for something that happened in the past that we haven't let go. And every time we see that person, and anytime we think of them again, it's bringing up those stress hormones into our body again, and that keeps compiling. Okay, because 80% of disease comes from our mind. 80%, that's the stress. That's all stress hormones. So it goes into certain parts of the body that are inflamed, that have inflammation. Inflammation is one of the biggest killers. And that's one of the biggest starts. So like, scientists are literally saying 80% of our thoughts are now going into our body and causing 80% of the disease in our body as well. And but when we can actually truly let go and truly forgive, and it's hard and it's really difficult for people, it really is, but what is it? I mean, how is that serving you? Honestly, how is that serving you in any way to be bitter and resentful and negative toward anybody? In what way is that serving you? Is that making you feeling any better? No, we feel like crap about it. When we release it, when we can let go, when we can say, yes, I truly forgive you. When you see that person, those emotions don't come up again. Oh my gosh, everything changes. And again, you start looking through a new lens, through a new filter, and you start looking at things much differently. And that's the key in life, is that we're only focusing on how we perceive the world, which is sadly in a negative way, and when we can look at, because again, what we focus on expands, Stephanie. So the more we focus on the beauty of the world. So we'll start with this. Let's say morning rituals. Okay. So like I do this course, and this is something that's changed my life. The first thing I do in the morning is I think of 3 things I'm grateful for. When we can add and stack gratitude in our lives, okay, we have a thing in our brain called the reticular activating system. I don't know if you're familiar with that is.
RAS, yeah.
Yeah, the RAS. So what it does is it filters out everything. If we had everything, we have so much stimulation in the world, when everything's coming at us like that, we get overwhelmed. And we already have 66,000 thoughts in our head already. So the reticular activating system filters things out, okay? But it also focuses on what your thoughts are. So if I'm focusing on the negatives all the time, that reticular activating system is always going to find the negative. But yet, when we focus on the positives in our lives, that reticular activating system is going to find the positives. I'll give you a great example. Like, if you're looking at like a new car, you're like, oh, I love that Mustang. I think you have a Mustang, that green Mustang. I love it. Your mind is going to pick up, your brain is going to pick up those Mustangs in the road. Oh my God, there's a Mustang, or if it's a new dress or new shoes for a woman, they're going to see that all the time. So again, what we focus on expands. When we can stack our day and start our day in the right way. So I start my day with 3 things I'm grateful for every morning. Okay. And then every night I focus on 3 things that were great throughout the day. Even if I had a shit day, nobody's going to have a great day all the time. Even if I have a shit day, I can still find 3 things that I'm grateful for, or that I was thankful for. And then I always, too, at the end of the day, after that, those 3 things that happened in my life that were great, I always focus on what I could have changed. Okay. Mm-hmm. Listen, our lives should be becoming better humans every day, and learning from our mistakes and trying to get better. So I can look at something that happened and transpired, and I could be like, okay, I should have done that differently. And I'm not going to beat myself up. I'm not going to, judge myself for that. But I'm also going to say, how could I have done it differently? How could I have changed it? And it's really great when we can reflect like that. Reflection is so huge, because that can change so many things. It's like, oh, I could have done that, and that. And there's times where I'm like, I may call up a friend the next morning. It's like, hey, listen, man, I think I said that. I hope you didn't take it the wrong way. And then, there's an understanding there as well, So reflection is key. But again, starting the day without looking at our phones, how do most people start the day, Stephanie? Oh, I got to go to work. 80% of the people hate their jobs, right? So they're frustrated. They got to go to work. They're thinking about the bills they got to pay, or, they got to do this and this and this, or they got to deal with that coworker today, or, whatever it is. So now we're only looking at the negatives, or we're looking at our phone and we're like, oh my God, Joe's in Hawaii right now. I'm stuck in Michigan. It's fucking cold, so it's like, then we stress about that as well. So now we're starting off our day looking at all the negatives. It's no different than kicking the bed in the morning, being angry, and how's the rest of your day turn out? You remember that old scenario back in the day? They used to talk about that. But so how we start our day really is basically how the rest of our day is going to go. So we can start our day stacking gratitude, being thankful for the things that, that we have in our lives. Also, I have a whole stack of morning rituals. I do a meditation practice, a breath work practice. I don't look at my phone the first hour in the morning. I think that's key. Stay away from that. But start your day. Like, I tell people, get up an hour early, have that quiet time. If you're in a family and it's disruptive and there's a lot going on in the morning because you woke up late, you got to cook, you got to make breakfast. Now you got to make lunches for the kids. So you're already starting your day with stress hormones, right? Stressing out. What if you could start your day an hour early before anybody got up and had that time for yourself? Okay. This is so important. I really try to instill this on people. Start your day with focusing on the great things in life. And that is one of the key things. So when we're starting our day stressed, the whole day is going to go stressed and it's not going to stop. And you're wondering why does every day seem the same? We're not free because we're so inundated with all these stress hormones that we got to do and all these things that we got to do. And I got to do this, I got to do this, I got to do this. It's time to really slow down. And to slow down, we have to figure out the best way to start our day and the best way to end our day. Again, what we focus on expands. So we have to be very understanding and being compassionate for people as well. And understand that people, Stephanie, are doing the best they can. They really are with the resources that they have. And most people don't have the resources or want to make the changes, but we still have to be compassionate to that as well. Not everybody's going to make the changes. And I've understood that,
And you have to be consistent too. Doing this for a month is going to be great for that month. But as soon as you stop and you slack on your morning routine, or you start to fall back into those reacting in anger or not practicing the pause, then you're going to find yourself in trouble again. It has to be this habit that you just create, like brushing your teeth, like, walking is a habit, riding a bike is a habit. You have to practice that for it to be able to be a positive in your life. It has to, that reticular activating system. One way to activate that system is when you not only reflect on these things, what am I grateful for? How did my day go? What could I have changed differently? If you write those down, your optic nerve you're able to visually see that on paper. So by actually looking at the thought that was once in your mind is now on paper, now out in the universe, just by looking at that activates your reticular activating system, which is your filter. It's a filter, and it will either filter out the negative so that you can focus on the positive, or it's going to keep you stuck in your shitstorm, and you're going to go in this, and the storm's going to turn into a tornado, and then you're going to end up on that downward spiral in the negative depression. You are not, I am who I am is only true if you choose that. So you have to make these conscious efforts and choices to pull yourself out. That's what this optimization is all about. And it just, thank you for this, because it all just flowed into this beautiful choice in life that we have to write each chapter of our story. You don't have to keep writing the same one. You can put a period at the end of it and start right now a new one. It doesn't have to be Monday. It doesn't have to be tomorrow. It can be right now, but you have to make that choice. And if it's dark and you don't know what to do and you feel like you've just ruined so many things, you have to reach out. You have to reach out and see what Brian has to offer. You have to find that solution, because I can't change it for you. Brian can't change it for you, but you certainly can reach out and we can give you the tools that you need to change it for you. So that's where I stand on that.
I think it's awesome. And it's so true about writing it down. So one of my morning rituals is journaling as well. So getting it out on paper, letting it out. That's so key. And,
journaling sounds like this weird thing. Oh, you want me to journal? Okay, yeah, I'll journal. No, I want you to activate your reticular activating system. I want you to get the filter going.
But it's what journaling also does is it if you're starting a transition in your life, a transformation, you can actually see. I went back to one of my first journals that I started 8 years ago, and I was like, holy cow, look at how far I've come. It's amazing. And then just things that you may not want to talk to your friends about that you can get out on paper to actually release. That's another way of letting go. is getting it
Freeing.
out on paper, you know,
Freedom.
just, you know, it is freedom, you know, just the things that I can't necessarily talk to some people about or don't want to, I can get it out there. So it's an amazing release. It really is, journaling. And I mean, scientifically what it does is it's pretty amazing. It's in my morning ritual course. It's a free course, so I'll give you the link. I have to do an edit today, and then I'm putting it back out. But it's a great way. It's a great way to kind of start your morning. And I talk about journaling. I talk about the benefits of meditation, the benefits of breath work. You know, and these are all little. These are, so we all have this toolbox, right, Stephanie? Like we need to get into that toolbox once in a while and take that out or take this out. And I'll tell you one last thing real quick is being able to downregulate our nervous system when we're in the state of fight and flight. Breath work is one of the biggest things we can do. And there's all different forms of breath work. There's pranayama, there's box breathing, there's 4-7-8 breathing. There's one that they just realized, if you know who Dr. Huberman is, Andrew Huberman, neuroscientist, fascinating guy, is becoming very popular. They just realized what's called the physiological sigh. This is just in the last like 3 months. This is fascinating. So this is a breath work that they found that it gives us the most amount of oxygen into our alveoli, into our lungs. Okay. So all it is really simple. You ever see somebody crying like a baby and they do that? They're going, and then they do this too. And they breathe in twice. It's actually naturally in us to do that. It's called the physiological sigh. And breathing in twice through the nose. So if I go and breathe in, it's actually getting 100% oxygen into these alveoli, which is in our lungs that oxygenate our blood. You're getting more oxygen into that. So they just realized this, doing 3 rounds of just breathing in through the nose twice. So it's, and then letting out slowly. Do that 3 times. I tell my clients this: if you're walking into a stressful meeting and you know it's going to be stressful, or you're going to have a hard talk with somebody, and I do this all the time. If I'm going to have a hard talk, or I have something going on, or I'm a little stressed and I can feel a little anxiety coming up, I will do these certain types of breath work. I used to do 4-7-8 until I started using this physiological sigh just recently. And it's amazing how we can go from a sympathetic nervous system that's fight and flight to parasympathetic, which we want to be in, because that's our rest and digest. That's our relaxation state. So when we're constantly in fight and flight, we're not thinking straight, because remember, the blood goes all the way to our extremities to fight and to run. And so we're not saying the right things, but we're in parasympathetic, we're a relaxed state. So that physiological sigh, the 2 breaths out of the nose and a slow exhale, is an amazing way to downregulate our nervous system and keep us calm. So it's very helpful for anybody that's going into any kind of stressful environment, having to have the talk, or going to see somebody they don't particularly like. I tell you, it's helped me numerous times. So,
And it's free.
And it's free. That's the beauty of it. Yeah. And it feels good. You know, it's the whole term, you know, getting high off your own supply. You know, you feel great. You really do. It's amazing.
Yeah. So there's plenty of ways to free from that imprisonment of your own mind, because that's what it is. You become a prisoner of your own mind. So simple ways to pull yourself out in the meantime: breath work, journaling, fixing your focus on the positive, activating that reticular activating system by journaling down in a notebook. You don't have to tell about your day and how you've got a crush here unless you want to, but you've got to get those thoughts out and express them and be able to see them and filter through them so that you can move forward. And then reaching out to a coach so you can take the next step. So thanks, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. This was fun.